Irv Weinstein, Rick Azar, Tom Joles. Meet these giants of Buffalo television. The longest-running and most popular anchor team in broadcast history. Now in a WBBZ television special, Giants of Buffalo Television.
Hello, everybody. John DeSciullo with you here on WBBZ-TV with our executive producer and owner of the station, Phil Arno. Phil, may I just say that we are in the presence of giants. They are here in our studio, and I'm speaking, of course, of the legendary WKBW Eyewitness News anchor team, Irv Weinstein, Rick Azar, and Tom Joles. Such an honor to have them here at WBBZ.
It doesn't get any better. It never got any better, and it's a pleasure to have them here. This is terrific. When you guys were starting out, Buffalo was actually a very good market to work in. It was a very attractive market.
It was a great market. And WKBW radio was, in the day, a powerhouse of a station. Up and down the East Coast, you could hear the station. It was 50,000 watts clear channel. You could hear it in northern Florida. We went up into Canada, and the signal went, it basically was a signal that went north and then down the East Coast. That was pretty much the signal. It was a tremendous station. We had people like, for those of you old enough to remember, people like Perry Allen, Russ the Moose Syracuse, who I went to high school with.
Jack Armstrong,
Who?
Jack Armstrong.
Jack Armstrong, he came along.
Tommy
the
Shannon.
All-American Boy.
Yeah.
And the one thing about those days, which would sound very foreign today, is that there were almost no women on the air. Definitely in television. In television here in Buffalo, there were one or two women. Paula Drew, I remember, and Doris Jones.
Yeah.
And there might have been another one, but I don't believe so. Certainly not in a major on-air role.
Well, and you talk about the changes not only with women, but younger people. And Phil, as you mentioned, Buffalo was maybe the 16th largest market then. It's now 51 or 52. But the other thing that's changed is technology. And I know, Tom, you shared a story with Alan Pergament in the paper recently about the technology, because you kind of look at the blizzard of '77 as that tipping point when the weather really did take a different place in the scope of news, and the technology now has changed so much that with your iPhone you can take a look at the radar and find out if it's going to rain on your city block. So much has changed since you took that mantle.
Yeah, when we started, we had a blackboard and chalk, and that was it, and my weather stick. And that of course drew more attention than anything that ever came down the pike. So little things like that people remembered, and they still come up to you and say, weather stick's still working in my house.
We had one at our place.
You didn't scare people, when you would deliver the weather, and if there was a bad storm, you would certainly say that, but it didn't come with all the bravado that you see now.
That's the main thing that I think bothers me nowadays. Tell the story. It's going to snow maybe, and maybe not. We've dodged many bullets, but be prepared. It may not happen, but I don't want to scare you. And that's what I used to emphasize, because there were a lot of people out there, elderly people and young people, that would say, oh my God, it sounds so awful. And I said, well, wait a minute, maybe it's not going to happen. If it does, we're prepared for it, but it may not. So just ride with it and see what happens.
Tom was reassuring. I mean, that's the truth.
You would believe anything that man would say.
Absolutely.
Look at his face.
One of the stories that we didn't get to the other night, Friday night, I had gotten an email from Don Postles, who could not be there. He said he's down at Pebble Beach playing golf. And he said to you all, Rick would be able to explain that to you, or the importance of being in Pebble Beach and playing golf. But he mentioned that the blizzard of '77, when Don was with you at Channel 7, was a moment, because you made it to the station, Irv, and you actually called the mayor at the time, Mayor Mikowski, and said, why aren't you bringing in the National Guard? And according to Don's note that he'd sent, he said the mayor asked you how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Stan Mikowski was a great guy.
Yeah.
But his learning curve was not probably. He got, in all fairness, he hadn't been in office that long when he got hit. Like the situation in New York City recently.
Yeah.
Bill de Blasio, the new mayor there, got hit with almost in modern times an unprecedented snowstorm. So it was one of those instances where meteorology and politics simply it didn't mix very well.
No.
Yeah, but I don't think there's anyone in the audience out there, if they were alive in 1977, that didn't remember the blizzard of 77.
Yeah.
And there is the difference between the network news people and the cable news people and the local news people in Buffalo is that we have shared those experiences with the viewers.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian and Diane and Scott Pelley have not. They have no idea. They may have reported about it, but they didn't go through it. They didn't walk through it. They didn't try to drive through it. They weren't in situations where at some times they had serious question as to whether they were going to survive it. Yeah. So it's true. We were the people that they ran into at the grocery store, at the Erie County Fairgrounds. We might have been called on to give a speech at a school in Wyoming County. So we were very much citizens of Buffalo and Western New York. And that's why I think the audience... Now, this is not to say that the people at the other stations in town did not do those things. They did. And they did a very good job. I leave it to the audience to determine why they watched us more than the other people once we reached #1 in the ratings, which took us about 7 years, if you remember. It was a long, arduous, tough process.
There's more with Irv, Rick, and Tom, Giants of Buffalo Television, right after this. Welcome back to the Giants of Buffalo Television.
You were individuals with personalities that you brought to the viewer. Right. It wasn't just the formal, stiff delivery that everybody had been so used to in news for so long.
Well, that's
true. Well, the style then was, here's a newscaster sitting up stiffly at a desk where there was a globe on the desk, and there were 3 or 4 clocks, Tokyo, Moscow, Washington, D.C., and it was standard. And we did things a little differently. We had a skyscrape of downtown or whatever. We just, we were flying by the seat of our pants, really.
Yeah, but the big thing is we talked to each other. The other guys didn't. They went in, the guy did the weather, the guy did the sports, the guy did the body of the news. We didn't do that.
Right.
We interacted, and I think that made people feel a little bit more comfortable when they were watching us.
And that became the norm today. Everybody does it today.
Yeah, that's what everybody does.
That's right. What the stations today are doing, what Fox News is doing today, is what we were doing in the mid-'60s.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is whether you like them or not.
Did they send you a check, incidentally?
They did not. I'm glad you reminded me. Yeah.
One of the interesting things from back then is you guys were actually the #1 station, if I'm not mistaken, in Toronto. You were the #1 newscast in Toronto for quite a while.
I would like to say we were but we were #2. We were the #2 station in Toronto. But to this day, they did a poll in Toronto, and they asked Canadians, when you hear about Buffalo, what or who do you think of? And they said, Irv, Rick, and Tom. My wife and I were in Toronto. I've told this story many times, and please excuse me if I'm telling it again. But we went on a weekend. We went up there for some fun, and I was dressed in jeans, you know, just very informal. And we're walking up Young Street. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye a hot rod car moving along slowly beside us on the sidewalk. And this kid leans out of the window and he says, "Hey, Irv." I said, "Yeah?" He says, "Me mom watches you daily." And I thought that's the most Canadian thing I'd ever. Me mom watches you daily. But you know, it just gives you a great feeling.
Yeah. I had an opportunity one time in Toronto, the scare of my life. My wife and I were driving down the street, and all of a sudden the OPP pulls up beside me with the lights flashing. And I thought, oh my gosh, am I going down the wrong way? So the cop came up to me and he said, rolled down the window. Oh, he said, I thought that's who it was. Go on.
Yeah. Wait a minute. I've got one like that. We're crossing the Peace Bridge into Canada, and we come to the toll taker, and he looks in and he says, "Irv?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Go ahead." That's the one and only time anything like that has happened to me. I have no idea who the fellow was, but if you're watching, thank you.
Yeah.
20 years later.
Well, and Jim Carrey from Toronto and Canada put together Bruce Almighty, which was a motion picture about eyewitness news and a feature reporter looking to take over for a retiring anchor. It was all positioned right at the time, Irv, that you were retiring. And SCTV, they say that some of those Second City television skits in Toronto were based on the eyewitness news format.
We beamed into
John
Toronto.
Candy, big fan.
We beamed into Toronto like a local station.
Yeah.
So all those people watched us from SCTV, John Candy, Dave Thomas, not our Dave Thomas, but the Dave Thomas from SCTV, which incidentally, in tribute to the CBC, that was the funniest show I've ever seen anywhere. SCTV. They ought to bring it back. They ought to bring the original people back. Andrea Martin, you know, and Dave Thomas, and who was the short? Rick Moranis,
Levy,
Bob and Don, you know, from the Great White North. What a great show! What a great show that was.
During all the time that you were there and working together, there's got to be favorite stories or the most memorable stories in sports and in weather. Certainly the blizzard, Jim Kelly coming to town. What are some of the most memorable stories that you ever covered?
Oh boy, there were a lot as far as I was concerned, because there was a lot of things that were happening in the Buffalo sports scene, the creation of the Buffalo Bills. I mean,
1964?
In 1960. Yeah,
Nice.
it was a long time ago. And people don't really understand, or can't understand, and I can't even understand, the impact that sports has, especially in a community like Buffalo. Everybody is a Bills fan in this town, you know. They were, and even Bison's fans. Look at the baseball park that we've got here. It's one of the finest minor league baseball parks in the country, if not the finest one, with a huge seating capacity. They can get 30, 40,000 people in that place if they want to. So it was a good sports town, always was. I remember professional wrestling down at the auditorium, the old Broadway auditorium, where my uncle used to drag me down there when I was 11 years old to watch Whipper Billy Watson, a Canadian, incidentally, who was a great, I mean, those, Moose Tatum, I mean, it was great to grow up in that era in this city. Everything was here, and I'm not sure if it's the same today, because we don't live in the area on enough of a consistent basis to make that kind of a judgment. But it was a terrific town to live in when I was a kid growing up.
There's more with Irv, Rick, and Tom, Giants of Buffalo Television, right after this. Welcome back to the Giants of Buffalo Television.
When I think back, over a 40-year news career in Buffalo. The story that was, for me, the most important story of my career was not a story that I personally was involved in, only emotionally. And that is, I was working in radio in November 1963 when President Kennedy was assassinated. We were a rock and roll radio station. We were playing Little Anthony and the Imperials, and suddenly the bells started going off on the UPI machines in the newsroom, and we knew something important was happening. And I ran over to the teletype, and it just said, "Kennedy shot, Dallas." To this moment, that moves me. And the station suddenly started playing funereal music, Mozart requiems. And anyone who was working in broadcasting at that time, I think if you asked them, and if they really thought about it, I think that is the one defining moment, one defining story.
No question.
It just absolutely destroyed everyone.
Tom, how about you? Of all the career moments?
There's been so many funny things happened outside, but the one that always I remember most vividly was I was doing the weather and I saw this character, this creature, this movement off to the side, getting closer and closer to me. And I couldn't really see anything what was happening until he got in right here, and I realized that he had nothing on. He was completely naked, and he's going to run across in front of the camera. Just then I said, let's go back in the studio for our temperatures. Cut away, went inside. The guy ran across. The guard grabbed him, took him into the guard station there. And to me, that was probably one of the, not so much scary, but more funny than anything. But what topped it off was the poor kid said, "I didn't get on TV, did I?" And I said, "No, you didn't." He said, "I lost $10 in the bet."
You know, Tom, you've had such an influence with children, and now they're adults, and people come up to you and say, you know, I grew up with you as Commander Tom. I think that was what was very unique, Phil, about the era of television, because there were only 3 or 4 stations, and you had to go to the television and turn the channel. And I know that people still come up to you. And in our few remaining moments, I want to touch on the influences that you've had, but particularly because you had 2 audiences. You had the children, and then you had the adults.
So lucky. And today, oftentimes people will say, it took me 5 years to realize that Commander Tom and the weather guy was the same person. And those little things like that just stuck with you. And yeah, I was very fortunate to have the young and the old as an audience, and just very lucky.
Well, just the love affair between you guys and the audience, that kind of defined you. I mean, Irv, with your facial expressions, you could say more about a story than all the copy that you read in an entire newscast. And I know people cherished looking at those expressions and seeing kind of the take that you put on stories. And was that something that you developed, purposely over the course, or was that just you showing through?
Well, it's probably due to my other life. Like Rick, I've done a lot of acting on stage in my life. So I learned to, in my acting, I learned to convey emotion to an audience, a live audience out there. And television isn't all that much different. You're conveying ideas, you're communicating information. And what we tried to do was talk to Joe and Jane out there, and not a mass audience of 2.5 million people. And I think that perhaps some of our success was due to that ability to connect with an audience on a one-on-one.
Well, and you not only that, but you sincerely like each other. You know,
absolutely.
Tom said something. You know,
Who told
you're
you
like
that?
you're like brothers.
Who told you that?
I guess I.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's important. It's,
You know, I said Friday night at the Museum of History presentation that we are truly three brothers from different mothers.
That's true. Yeah.
We share a sensitivity. Here's a farm boy from Lockport. Here's a Brooklyn-born kid, you know, and here's a son of Lithuanian immigrants from Rochester who got together. There is no possible way you could have planned that.
No.
No consultant, no genius of broadcasting. They keep trying, but they keep failing. And I would like to say that we planned it that way, but we didn't. We didn't.
Just happened.
It just happened. And we were so damn lucky.
Yep.
well, one of the things that I was certainly lucky enough to work with you from 1983 until your
were
respective
lucky.
retirements. And we did a lot of great promos together. I know you mentioned what Sue and I had
Oh,
done
yeah.
with the Irv
Oh,
song
yeah.
and the in the
Yeah.
stadium, and those promos were all so funny, and Tom outside and everything. But one of the things we did together was the Variety Kids Telethon, and I know that's meant a lot to me, and I know it's meant a lot to you. And you know, we thought, what could we give Irv, Rick, and Tom as an appreciative gift for appearing with us on WBBZ? But we'd like to make a donation in your honor to this year's Variety Kids Telethon for you being with us
Thank you.
here on our stage today.
Thank you.
The least that
Thank
we could
you.
do, and it would help others in your name.
That's
So,
wonderful.
Thank you.
I
Thank
can't
you
think of
very
a,
much. Wow.
of a better or more appropriate gift.
Thank you.
Well, Phil, final words before we wrap up. It's your station.
Well, you know, any message for the viewers of WBBZ? I mean, the classic programming that we air is from the era that we're talking about. It's the good storytelling, the good writing, the good programming that you don't have to be embarrassed to watch with your kids.
Yeah.
So the audience that we have very much appreciates you and the things that you did in your history in Buffalo broadcasting. Any comments to them?
Well, I think a lot of people are reliving that era by watching the old wonderful, wonderful TV shows, whether they were comedies or dramas, westerns, whatever. It just brings back memories, and people love to be a part of that. And
Right.
so they're very fortunate to have this station that brings that to them.
Yeah, and I think Rick shares my sentiments when I say to the audience, your audience, the entire audience, thank you so much. You've given us a life we could have never dreamed of.
True. Amen.
So we
Amen.
thank you.
Thank you.